think that we have to be trying to hit home runs every time. I think if we hit some singles and doubles, if we find some very specific things that this group can help us on and we can work on together, then we can build on that success.
That's President Obama yesterday talking about job creation and economic growth. And Jon Karl, he made it clear he's not swinging for the fences.
But we are always looking for the home runs here on Top Line, which begins right now.
Welcome to ABC News Top Line. I'm Karen Travers.
And I'm Jonathan Karl on Capitol Hill.
And I'm here in our Washington Bureau. And every day at 12 noon Eastern Time, we bring you the latest in politics. And you can, of course, follow us 24 hours a day on Twitter. I'm at Karen Travers, and Jon is at Jon Karl. With that, Jon, kick us off. What's your top line today?
Well, it starts right with unacceptable and irresponsible. That's what Eric Cantor said just a short while ago. Conference call with reporters saying that a government shutdown would not be an acceptable or responsible alternative for Republicans. That's what Eric Cantor said, but now the positioning here, Karen, is clearly over who would get blamed for a government shutdown. And I think the most interesting development that we have seen in the last 24 hours on this subject is indications that Democrats are now preparing to come out with their own plan to have more cuts in government funding for the rest of the year. They have really moved a long way, Karen, a long way towards the Republican position.
And it's going to be a busy week next week on Capitol Hill. When they all get back to Washington, the clock's going to be ticking for that Friday deadline. Next up, governors gathering. The nation's governors come to Washington this weekend. This is their annual winter meeting. It's a chance for Republicans to possibly try and get in a few punches on the president's own turf. The top of the agenda, of course, is job creation, economic growth, and their budget deficits. Today, President Obama is going to be meeting with just the Democrats, but Jon, on Monday, he's going to bring in some Republicans. This could be a very interesting meeting.
Yeah, and look, all these governors, Democrats and Republican, are facing really tough budget situations. Of course, we've all been talking over the last week or so about Scott Walker out in Wisconsin. But, you know, look at what Andrew Cuomo is facing in terms of a massive budget deficit in the state of New York, looking at some of the very same cuts and confrontations with the unions that we've seen in states that were with Republican governors. So this, again, should be a good meeting, series of meetings to watch.
I think if you did some quotes anonymously and said, who said this, a Republican or a Democrat, I think you'd have a hard time figuring out who said what.
Yeah, no doubt. Even Jerry Brown out in California. Next up, leaving Libya. After 3 days of waiting at port, mostly due to weather issues, 100 Americans have been able to leave Libya on a ferry. Now, Karen, the question is, with those Americans now safe and significantly reducing the number of Americans left in Libya, will we see a tougher line or hear a tougher line from President Obama? You know, it's interesting, Karen, he has not even, as far as I can tell, mentioned the name Muammar Gaddafi yet. Will we see him come out and, you know, forcefully talk about Gaddafi?
It definitely seems like the White House has been holding back just a bit as they've been waiting to see how this plays out. But this might be the green light they need to come out a little more forcefully over the next couple days. Next up is Romney Care. Jon, did we just hear the first shots of the 2012 Republican presidential nomination battle? You know, that one that we're all really hoping starts as soon as possible. In his new book, Mike Huckabee bashes Mitt Romney's health care plan from his days when he was the Massachusetts governor. He called it a failed statewide health care, and he said it was just like President Obama's health care plan, which, of course, we all know Republicans and conservatives hate. But Jon, Romney is defending this. He's drawing a line in the sand and saying he's proud of what he accomplished. So where do we think this is going to go from here?
Well, clearly this is Romney's Achilles heel. This is his biggest weakness going into this race. And you know, Karen, because you covered the race, that Huckabee, there's just a certain contempt, dislike, detest. He detests Mitt Romney. I mean, there's just something of, you know, I mean, that he is, you know, in many ways, a lot of people were looking at the race saying that Huckabee stayed in so long last time around, really just to be sure that McCain was gonna trounce Romney. The interesting thing, though, talking to Republican operatives who are on the sidelines and in some of them involved already in 2012. The conventional wisdom clearly right now is that Huckabee is not going to run, so we'll see if he actually makes the leap.
And that's what makes this even more interesting, as this thorn in Mitt Romney's side, lobbing these bombs from the sidelines, similar to what Sarah Palin might be doing over the next couple of months, too. We are joined now from the White House with Ann Compton, ABC News White House correspondent, to talk about this looming potential of a government shutdown. Ann, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks, guys, very much. You know, I was around for that last big shutdown, 1995. It lasted for 3 weeks, went into 1996, gave a long holiday vacation to federal workers, and it didn't come out so well.
That's true. And, and we're hearing both sides saying, we don't want this to happen, we want to prevent this. As John said at the top of the show, Democrats are going to put out their own plan potentially to avoid this next week. But what are some of the key differences that you're seeing from 1995 to 2011?
Well, one of the great parallels, as you point out, is everybody then said, too, oh, we don't want to shut down the government, don't want it to happen. They're saying that this time. Back then, they actually sat down and talked to each other, the president, the congressional leaders, the Republicans from the Hill. Of course, they never did come up with a deal. They even had Leon Panetta as the White House chief of staff. His job just before that had been head of the House Budget Committee, and they still didn't get an agreement. And when that shutdown came down, it was not every part of the government. Some parts of the government were still operating, but it went on for 3 weeks. Workers were forced to come into work and then be sent directly home. A lot of federal workers went without pay. A lot of government services did not happen. One of my favorite moments came, it was winter, there were storms coming through, and I took my family station wagon over to Mr. Wash on 13th Street here in Washington, and right in front of the family station wagon, going through the automatic car wash, was the president's limousine, because the guys who work in the garage over on 22nd Street were not allowed to come to work and wash the president's car.
Heaven forbid, my God. But looking at this, I mean, the conventional wisdom is that the Republicans really suffered. This was a huge victory for Bill Clinton. And I'm just wondering, if you look back, if that's not a little simplistic. I mean, obviously, I guess in the big picture, Clinton was the loser, because if without the shutdown, he doesn't get impeached. But that's about meeting Monica Lewinsky. But if you look at this, the midterms that came in '96. Republicans kept the House, and they actually added seats in the Senate. I mean, was it really as clear-cut a victory for Clinton as we now seem to remember it?
No, Newt Gingrich, who was the new speaker, first Republican speaker in a generation, will point out that he thinks the Republicans did okay. They held on to the House and Senate. Bob Dole didn't win the presidency the next year, but I don't know that the government shutdown factored into that. But this time, look, oh, by the way, 3 years after that shutdown, the federal government had its first balanced budget in ages, because they'd been pushed to it. Such a different chemistry now, though. Look at that. Nobody's predicting a balanced budget anytime soon. The distance they have to go is so far, so great. And remember, shutting down the government costs hundreds of millions of dollars, because Congress almost always comes back and says, oh, those federal workers that were put out on furlough, we'll go back and pay them anyway. Hundreds of millions of dollars.
Ann Compton, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be keeping a close eye on that all next week. Again, the clock will be ticking till Friday. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.